Let's go over the major news you shouldn't miss from February 27, 2026. We begin with the top financial headlines. There are three major developments to discuss. OpenAI raises massive funding round. According to Reuters, OpenAI has completed an extraordinary new funding round totaling about $110 billion, with major investments from companies including Amazon, Nvidia, and SoftBank. OpenAI said the new capital injection would value the company, the maker of ChatGPT, at roughly $840 billion, making it one of the most valuable technology firms in the world. The reported contributions are staggering. Amazon invested about $50 billion, Nvidia around $30 billion, and SoftBank another $30 billion. This news sends a powerful message. At a time when many investors are questioning whether artificial intelligence spending has become a bubble, leading AI companies are continuing to invest aggressively. Such large commitments could help ease concerns that AI enthusiasm is fading. OpenAI pursuing defense contracts. A second development, reported by the Wall Street Journal, involves OpenAI's efforts to secure contracts with the U.S. Department of Defense. CEO Sam Altman has reportedly been engaging with the Pentagon amid tensions between the military and another American AI startup, Anthropic. Anthropic has imposed restrictions on how its technology can be used, particularly in military applications. U.S. defense officials have warned that if those restrictions remain, existing contracts could be cancelled. Despite this standoff, OpenAI appears eager to step in and reach agreements with the Pentagon on the use of AI technologies. Why Anthropic imposed restrictions? This leads to the third major issue: why Anthropic, widely considered one of the most advanced AI companies, has placed limits on how the military can use its software. The dispute centers on two key restrictions. First, Anthropic refuses to allow its technology to be used for surveillance of U.S. citizens. The company has taken a firm stance against domestic monitoring applications. Second, it prohibits the use of its AI in fully autonomous lethal weapons systems. In other words, the software cannot be used to create weapons that can independently decide when to use deadly force. Any military use must involve human control, either direct operation or remote authorization. Anthropic argues that allowing machines to make life-and-death decisions raises serious ethical and safety concerns. If software malfunctioned or was misused, it could lead to unintended civilian casualties. Pentagon pushback and industry response. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly warned that excessive restrictions could lead to the termination of contracts. Anthropic's leadership has responded that these principles are non-negotiable. Interestingly, other major tech companies, including Google and Amazon, have expressed support for similar safeguards. However, not all firms agree. Some companies are less concerned about imposing strict limits, particularly those pursuing broader commercial or defense opportunities. Even within OpenAI, there appears to be a more flexible stance. While the company acknowledges the need for safeguards, it has not adopted restrictions as strict as Anthropic's. Will self-regulation become a global standard? The larger question is whether voluntary ethical limits set by AI companies can evolve into industry standards. Two major challenges remain. First, can such rules be adopted across Western technology companies? Second, even if Western firms agree, will countries like China or Russia follow similar principles? Given the strategic importance of artificial intelligence, this debate over ethics, security, and military applications is likely to continue for years. Second major story: tensions surrounding Iran suddenly escalate. The second major story concerns the rapidly worsening situation around Iran. Many people may have noticed that the tone of international news coverage has become noticeably more urgent. We can understand the latest developments from two key perspectives. Failed negotiations heighten tensions. According to the Wall Street Journal, indirect negotiations between the United States and Iran in Geneva concluded early this morning without an agreement. In U.S. media, the outcome is widely described as a major setback. Iran reportedly rejected American demands to ship all highly enriched uranium abroad and dismantle core nuclear facilities such as the Fordow site. Previously, President Trump had set a negotiation deadline of about 10 to 15 days. That deadline is now effectively expiring. Although both sides agreed to continue technical discussions next week in Vienna, signals from the U.S. delegation suggest that diplomatic options may be running out. Military signals intensify. At the same time, the U.S. military has taken steps that many interpret as preparations for possible conflict. For the first time, the United States has deployed F-22 stealth fighter jets directly to Israel. 12 aircraft have reportedly arrived at Ovda Air Base in southern Israel, marking an unprecedented move. The U.S. State Department has also upgraded travel advisories and authorized the evacuation of non-essential personnel and family members from the U.S. Embassy in Israel. Previously, evacuation warnings focused mainly on Iran. Now Israel is included as well. Meanwhile, Senator Lindsey Graham, a longtime advocate of a hardline approach toward Iran, has intensified his rhetoric. He compared the current situation to the period before the fall of the Berlin Wall, suggesting that military action now could lead to transformative change. Vice President J.D. Vance also stated that even if the United States strikes Iran, it would not become a prolonged war. This appears aimed at reassuring the public about the risks of military action. Taken together, diplomatic failure, military deployments, evacuation measures, and political messaging, U.S. media increasingly believe that the risk of war is rising sharply. What would military action aim to achieve? The second aspect concerns the goals of a potential U.S. strike on Iran. According to analysis cited by the Wall Street Journal, these objectives can be understood at three levels. 1. Eliminating Iran's nuclear capabilities. The primary goal would be to destroy major nuclear facilities such as Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. These targets could potentially be hit through airstrikes. However, analysts note that similar operations in the past did not fully eliminate Iran's nuclear program. Facilities can be rebuilt, and enriched uranium stockpiles may be relocated in advance. 2. Weakening Iran's regional military threat. A second objective would be to reduce Iran's deterrence capabilities. This could involve striking ballistic missile production sites near Tehran and command centers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. 3. Regime destabilization. The most ambitious goal, strongly promoted by hardline figures, would be political change within Iran itself. Some advocates believe military pressure could weaken or even collapse the current government. Can these goals realistically be achieved? From a purely military standpoint, the United States holds overwhelming air superiority and could likely strike designated targets. But achieving long-term strategic outcomes is far less certain. Past airstrikes initially claimed success but later proved insufficient, as facilities were rebuilt and materials had been moved. Technical knowledge cannot be destroyed as easily as physical infrastructure. There is also the risk of wider consequences. If Iran were to block the Strait of Hormuz, global oil supplies could be disrupted, potentially triggering an energy crisis and driving inflation worldwide. A strategy with uncertain aftermath. Even some proponents of military action acknowledge uncertainty about what would follow. Senator Graham, for example, has suggested that overthrowing Iran's government is not necessarily the responsibility of the United States, implying that the focus would be on dismantling capabilities rather than managing long-term outcomes. Israel has reportedly encouraged Washington to act, arguing that this may be the best opportunity to severely degrade Iran's nuclear program. Some Israeli officials claim such strikes could set Iran's capabilities back by decades. However, similar claims were made after previous operations, which later proved overly optimistic. A critical weekend ahead. Overall, the situation remains highly volatile. Diplomatic efforts continue, but military preparations and political rhetoric suggest that the coming days, especially this weekend, could be decisive for the future of U.S.-Iran relations and regional stability. Third major story: sudden military conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The third major story concerns a sudden escalation between Pakistan and Afghanistan, raising fears of a wider regional conflict. According to Reuters, the Taliban government in Afghanistan says it is open to negotiations after Pakistan launched airstrikes on major Afghan cities, including Kabul and Kandahar. Airstrikes on major cities. Pakistan reportedly bombed key targets in both the capital, Kabul, and Kandahar, where Taliban leadership is based. This marks a serious breakdown in relations between the two neighboring Islamic countries. Verified video footage shows thick black smoke rising from multiple locations in Kabul, with large fires burning on the ground. One taxi driver described hearing aircraft overhead, followed by 2 explosions. Panic spread as people rushed out of buildings while ammunition stored nearby continued to detonate. Pakistani security officials say the strikes targeted Taliban military offices and checkpoints using air-to-ground missiles. Islamabad claims the attack was retaliation for earlier assaults launched from Afghan territory. Pakistan reports that hundreds of Taliban officials and fighters were killed, while Afghan sources say dozens of Pakistani soldiers died. Both sides acknowledge casualties but dispute the numbers. International mediation begins. Diplomatic efforts are already underway to prevent further escalation. Qatar has begun mediating between the two sides, and China has also announced efforts to help calm tensions. Despite the violence, the Taliban's willingness to negotiate suggests that neither side may want a prolonged war. Why did former allies turn against each other? Another Reuters report explains the deeper background behind this sudden confrontation. For decades, Pakistan was one of the Taliban's closest allies. In the 1990s, Islamabad played a major role in supporting the group, viewing it as a way to counter India and gain strategic influence in Afghanistan. When the Taliban returned to power in 2021, Pakistan initially celebrated the outcome. But relations deteriorated quickly. Security tensions along the border. Pakistan accuses the Taliban of allowing anti-Pakistan militant groups to operate from Afghan territory. 2 major threats are frequently cited: the Pakistani Taliban, known as TTP. Separatist militants seeking independence for Pakistan's Balochistan region. Since 2022, fighters from these groups have allegedly crossed into Pakistan to carry out terrorist attacks and armed assaults. From Islamabad's perspective, this is unacceptable. Afghanistan's counter-accusations. However, Afghanistan also accuses Pakistan of harboring extremist groups hostile to the Taliban government. Officials claim that militants linked to ISIS are operating from Pakistani territory and launching attacks into Afghanistan. In other words, both countries accuse each other of supporting enemies. Trigger for the current crisis. Tensions reached a breaking point after a series of attacks inside Pakistan last weekend targeting military and police forces. One incident reportedly killed multiple security personnel and civilians, prompting Islamabad to threaten broader military action. Pakistan's defense minister even warned of the possibility of a full-scale war. Is a full war likely? Despite the rhetoric, analysts say a prolonged conventional war is unlikely due to the massive imbalance in military strength. Pakistan's armed forces are far larger and better equipped. Approximate comparisons illustrate the gap. Pakistan has around 600,000 active personnel. Taliban forces number roughly 170,000. Pakistan possesses hundreds of fighter jets and thousands of armored vehicles. Afghanistan's air capabilities are extremely limited. Pakistan is also a nuclear-armed state. Given these realities, the Taliban faces overwhelming disadvantages. Negotiation may be the only viable option. Because of this asymmetry, Afghanistan's leadership appears to favor negotiations rather than continued escalation. A full-scale war would likely be devastating for the Taliban government, making compromise the more practical path. A fragile situation. Although tensions remain high, the combination of diplomatic mediation, military imbalance, and mutual risk suggests that the conflict may stop short of total war, at least for now. Still, the situation remains volatile and could shift rapidly depending on developments on the ground. This has been Anti-Noise Intelligence, tracking the world so you stay ahead of it. Thank you for listening, and make sure to tune in again tomorrow.